I'll introduce myself a little bit, because this is actually my district. I'm State Senator Jim Forsythe, and I'm very happy to be here. I am also Ron Paul's New Hampshire campaign chair. I supported him in 2008, and very, very happy to be supporting him again, and hopefully can do a little more for him this time now that I'm in the state senate. I wanted to also introduce Barbara Aichinger, whose home you're in, if you don't know her. He's cooking. I got to know Barb during my campaign, and she was somebody who was very active in property rights. Towns were passing either ordinances or through the way they did the tax maps, getting people in a situation where they might have 2 or 3 lots together, and they would just put them all together and say that's one lot. So if you wanted to sell a portion, you were now hosed. So they basically just destroyed your property value without your permission. And she was instrumental, I'd say the lead person really, in getting SB 406 passed, which says you can't do that. So a state law that says towns can't do that. And then she also worked in Gilford to fix it at the town level and undo the ones that had been done. But after that bill was passed, you know, what is it, the town association?
The municipal association.
Yeah, the municipal association came out and said, well, that law is fine and all, but it doesn't apply to stuff that happened before the law was passed. Therefore, all these involuntarily merged lots are still involuntarily merged. So she came to me, and we worked together with a state rep on a bill. The bill got retained in the House, which meant it was dead for the year. And there was property owners in Windham who were in the situation they were trying to sell, and they were stuck, and they were going to be stuck for another year. So we took a bill in the Senate, amended it, and then she worked very, very hard with myself and a number of other people to get the bill fixed up to address the House's concerns, and the House then concurred with it, and we got that passed. And she was very key in doing that, very key. So thanks, Barbara, for doing that. I want to say very briefly why I'm supporting Dr. Paul before he gets up and talks is, you know, I didn't want to be a politician. I did it kind of because of the way our country was headed. After I got involved with Dr. Paul's campaign, I realized I had to try to do something. Government's just continued to grow and grow and grow, as people know. I mean, who thinks government's gotten too big? Too small? So everybody thinks government's too big. And we finally done something about that at the state level. Over the last 100 years, there's only been one time that the state budget's gone down, and that was by about 1%. This year, we reduced the budget by 11%. So it's absolutely historic. So I feel very confident we're getting New Hampshire on a firm footing, but the federal government's another story. It's just completely out of control. You know, our deficit to GDP numbers are like Greece's are, and you saw what happened to them. So we're really in a crisis, and we need somebody who won't just slow the growth of government, won't just talk about it, who will actually do it, and someone that's not just come to the scene recently with this message, but has consistently spread this message for 30 years. And that's Dr. Paul. He's the only person I have confidence in that would actually shrink the size of government, which is what we have to have. He's definitely also the only person that would really address the monetary issue. The fact that we've increased our money supply by $3 trillion, and now the credit's collapsed, and we're probably now going to start to see inflation kick in. He's been warning about this. When he campaigned in 2008, he was completely correct. People kind of laughed at him on stage, the other presidential candidates, some of them still running, again. But he was talking about it then. He understands the issue, and we definitely need to listen, and we need to get into the White House. So, Barbara, do you want to say a few words?
Okay, I will. Well, ladies and gentlemen, thank you all for coming. Thanks to Jim for all the hard work he's done. And I got involved with Dr. Paul's campaign, actually through my son Daniel. When I went through the lot merging business, Daniel said to me, "Mom, the government has violated your constitutional rights." I said, "Gee, I didn't know I had those." Okay. So he got me involved, and I started reading about Dr. Paul's work. And I've noticed all the YouTube videos, which we've kind of put on some laptops around the house here. And so without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to introduce to you the next President of the United States, Dr.
Thank you very much, and thank you, Barbara and Eddie, for opening up your home, and thank you all for coming. Appreciate that very much. We got into New Hampshire yesterday and been traveling a good bit in these last 2 days, and I was told that every single day of the year has weather exactly like this, and that's... I would like to have one grandchild here with me. There she is, hiding there, Lisa. So Lisa is with me and traveling with me. She's one of 18 grandchildren, and she is in between her first and second year of medical school. And she has an older sister that's going to be a senior this year in medical school, and a younger sister that is thinking about becoming a doctor. She's in college. But it is a real delight to be here, and our travels have been very, very productive. But what I've been asked so often these last several weeks or several months is because the views that I've been expressing have been becoming better known. And they'll say, what is the difference between now and 4 years ago? Is there a difference? And the difference is dramatic from my viewpoint. And it's mainly because it's different for the people. And I think Jim mentioned it in the introduction that I talked about the economy and worried about the bubble that was forming and that the recession had actually started. I mentioned as early as 2007. But now it has happened. Before, I would talk a whole lot about the runaway spending in general, but especially on what we were doing overseas, and defended the position based on the founders, based on our Constitution, and based on Republican traditions, that we can't be the policemen of the world, and we don't have any money. Now, people are starting to realize that, and they're starting to say, hey, maybe he's right about the foreign policy. But even as recently as the year 2000, George Bush ran arguing that we should have a humble foreign policy and that we shouldn't be a nation building, was critical of the Democrats. And look at what happened. We got more involved. And then, after the involvement, then when the current president started campaigning, he says, we need to start coming home. He did such a good job in that campaign, arguing the case for a more peaceful foreign policy. They awarded him the Nobel Peace Prize for this in these speeches. But where are we now? More wars. What's scary is nobody knows how many wars we're in. Well, of course, we don't declare them anymore, which I find rather disgusting. Since World War II, there's never been a declaration. Of course, Korea, we went to war under UN banners. We're still in Korea. We're still in Germany. We're still in Japan. How long do we do this? Especially when we're flat out broke. Vietnam breaks out. There was a resolution. That's why I'm always so cautious about resolutions coming up, because before you know it, you're endorsing another war. And of course, during the 60s, before we really got overly involved in Vietnam, we had the Cuban crisis, and that was in 62. And I was in the middle of my medical training, and I got a draft notice, and I was called up. But I tell everybody I wasn't drafted, I was a volunteer. And the reason I tell them that was, technically it was true, because they sent me a draft notice, and Uncle Sam sent me this thing and said, you're going to be drafted as a buck private in the Army unless you want to volunteer. If you volunteer, we'll make you a captain, and you can pick the service that you want to be in. And I said, I'm volunteering. So I was a volunteer, and of course I wasn't very anxious to go, but I made the best of it and ended up actually staying in longer. So I served it for 5 years in that period of time. But had time to do some thinking about war, didn't have to go to Vietnam, but traveled around the world. And one of the most interesting trips was going into Pakistan and going up to the Khyber Pass and the borders. And I can just still see those mountains there. And one of the senior officers said, Ron, he says, you see that up there? He says, there are tribes up there, hundreds of thousands of people living up there. They've lived like that for hundreds of years. And I remember him saying, he said, they've never been conquered. But when you look at it, you know that you can't even tell borders. So when I look at that border and that problem, the problem what the Soviets got in, how we fell into this trap, and I think, well, if we're concerned about borders, why don't we worry about our borders instead of those borders, over there, and trying to sort it all out. But I've advocated a non-interventionist foreign policy. I believe it's constitutional, it's traditional, it's what the founders advised. It's the kind of thing that Eisenhower suggested by saying, watch out for the military-industrial complex. Robert Taft said, watch out for NATO. Before you know it, you'll be going to war for NATO. Well, NATO lasted through the Cold War, but there it is. Obama didn't even come to us to ask for a declaration of war. He just took us to war in Libya. He claims it's not a war because they're not shooting back. So just as long as we punish them and do the problem, it's not for real. I don't believe in that stuff. I believe we're broke, we shouldn't do it, we don't win friends, and it doesn't help our national security. So this is the reason why I think that's the easiest place to cut. There's no reason in the world why U.S. taxpayers should be paying $1 billion to build an embassy in Baghdad, and one at Kabul, and one in Pakistan. And that's what we're doing all around these regions, and building air bases and military bases. And I want to tell you, they don't like us over there. They just assume we not be there, and they rather resent it. And if you sort of have questions about that, just think about how we as a people would respond if anybody did that to us. You know, either, what if somebody said cruise missiles over here and drones and targeting people and putting bases in. I'll tell you one thing, it would unify the American people. We would be unified and we wouldn't put up with it. But the issue that has come up the most here, but it's coming up every place I go, and that is the economic issues. But in a way that is related to foreign policy, because the economic issues are related to spending too much money. But we're in a mess. Jim mentioned the importance I have placed on monetary policy in the Federal Reserve, because you cannot solve a problem of a recession unless you know why a recession exists. And a recession is the consequence of the market trying to correct the excesses that are caused by spending too much and the Federal Reserve printing too much, because that distorts the marketplace. Mises, the great Austrian economist, said that socialism would never work because there's no pricing structure. The businessman doesn't know what to do if you don't have a free market pricing. But we have half of that because we don't have free market in money. The Fed thinks they know what the interest rates should be. So they have very low interest rates, which helps bail out the banks. At the same time, it takes the elderly who are trying to take care of themselves, put money in the bank where they might make 6% or 7%, they get 1%. So it's wrong to do that. It's unconstitutional, it's bad economics, and it's the cause of the recession. It's the cause of the depressions that we have. And it facilitates big government, because as long as Congress knows that if they run up a deficit and they can't collect enough taxes, they can't borrow enough money, or interest rates go up, they know the Fed will do it. The Fed just a week ago created $25 billion in 1 week. And they'll continue to do this. If they weren't allowed to do this, interest rates would go up. And some people say, well, that'll cut off the boom. Well, that's what needs to be done if there's not enough savings to do that. But instead, it encourages governments to spend. Congress would have to cut spending if the interest rates started rising, because they couldn't blame the Fed because they wouldn't be allowed to do it. Monetary policy is a big, big issue. And it was during the 60s that I came across Austrian economics and the explanation of the business cycle, and became firmly convinced. And actually the founders knew a lot about this because they hated inflation. And that's why they said nothing but silver and gold can be legal tender. There's still a lot of people in this country that think our dollar is backed by something. And it isn't. It's backed up by the promises of our politicians. And they're not all that trustworthy. They go, you know, we're going to take care of you from cradle to grave, and deficits don't matter. Right now, they're not serious about cutting these deficits. So they get together and say, this is serious. Let's cut everybody's budget by 10%. That's what you would have to do in a household or a business, something you cut. But there's no intention. It's only a blame game and who's going to have power. Because basically what we as a people have been putting up with is a system of government where both party leaders have generally ended up doing the same thing. The foreign policy never changes. Monetary policy, nobody even talks about it. Does the welfare system really change? We finally get control in the White House and the Congress, and we doubled the size of the Department of Education. And also, we expanded, medical care, the prescription drug program. And so we, as Republicans, don't necessarily have a right to say, oh, yes, it's all the opposition. I think it's really up to the people to decide what they think the government should do. As long as we as conservatives, Republicans, or Democrats, or whatever, say that we want the government to run an entitlement system, and we want to police the world, and we want to fill in the gaps by borrowing money and fill in the gaps by printing money, there's no way you can solve this problem. We are going to go the way of Greece. And our fundamentals are just as bad, but we're different because we have license to print, we have the reserve currency, we have the strongest military, and that conveys a confidence, but it's a false confidence. It just means that we get away with it for longer periods of time. If we'd have been a third world nation, this would have stopped, all this borrowing. But we now, because of this setup, it's unique in all of history, because never has there been a single fiat currency used as gold. That is, we print money, we spend it overseas, we live beyond our means, our jobs go overseas because of the weak currency and all the other things that we do. So we have done that, and now we have the biggest debt ever known in our history. We owe $3 trillion to foreigners. And so just paying the interest on that is unbelievable. And we're increasing the national debt this year by over $2 trillion. I'll tell you $1.6 trillion. But if they add up what we take and steal from the social insurance, the Social Security, it's $2 trillion. But if you add up everything, the additional entitlement obligations, we as a government now have obligated all the taxpayers by $5 more trillion this year. It can't last. And, you know, I talk to a lot of young people, and I see there are a few young people here, and the young people seem to get a hold of this pretty well. The campuses are alive with this. They want to study the Federal Reserve, and they want to stop these wars, and they don't want to be taken care of because they don't trust the government that is going to take care of them when they're 65 years of age. So people are coming alive with this, and this is why I'm encouraged. Not because of what's happening in Washington. I want to change Washington, but I want to change it in a way that will improve things. But where we're getting the backbones coming from so many people outside of Washington. That's part of what the Tea Party movement is all about. It's the kind of thing that Barbara was talking about. She finally said, hey, what's going on around here? And getting involved and getting legislation passed. And that is what's happening. And yet we have a long way to go. I mean, it is, and it's not going to be easy, because if you, most people say, well, what should you do if we have this crisis? Are you going to let everybody go bankrupt, you know, what should you do? The truth is, the government should do very, very little. And they should restore sound principles, low taxes, less regulation, sound money, and do all these things. But when there's a lot of malinvestment and a lot of debt, the most important thing you can do is liquidate it and get back to getting rid of your debt. And it's a horrible thing for anybody to go bankrupt. But Greece should just declare bankruptcy. That's what they should do. But instead, they take that debt and they pass it on, guess to whom? Us! We're going to get a bunch of that Greek debt because we're part of the IMF. So how long can we continue to do this without suffering the consequences of rampant depreciation of our dollar? We're already seeing it. So when you see any prices that go up, you say that's a tax, that's the inflationary tax, because we've just diluted our money supply by $3 trillion on this bailout, which it worked for only the bankers, the big business people who got the money. Who lost? The middle class lost, and they lost their jobs, they're losing their houses, and they're getting stuck with the bill of high inflation. So this is very important to understand how the economy works and convince the people it's in their best interest to have real money and sensible policies and have balanced budgets. I don't know why we can't defend it. A few years ago in the debate, they recited these beliefs I have, and they implied, well, how can you be a Republican like this, and how can you expect to get anywhere? I said, yeah, what is so strange about balanced budgets, limited government, sound money, a sensible foreign policy, a strong national defense, defend our borders, and you consider this strange? I consider the strangeness all in D.C., and that's why I think we should change it. That's why I'm running for president. Thank you very much.